in-depth guide for Scrum and the rules for the game. Scrum is a framework for developing and sustaining complex projects. What is the Scrum body of knowledge? It is a compilation of the latest methods and best practices employed by its practitioners and experts. Furthermore, it provides guidelines for the successful implementation of Scrum. It is the most popular Agile project management and project development framework. It provides a comprehensive framework that includes the principles, aspects, and processes of the Scrum framework. Now that we know about Scrum and the SBOC guide, let's see the applicability of Scrum as defined in the SBOC. Scrum framework is widely used across portfolios, programs, and/or projects in any industry, products, services, or any other deliverables to be developed and projects of any size or complexity. According to the Scrum body of knowledge, the term product may refer to a product, service, or other deliverable. The practicality of Scrum as a framework is that it can be applied effectively to any project in any industry, whether they are small projects with 6-person teams or large complex projects with up to several hundred team members. Now that we have pretty much summed up the Scrum body of knowledge in general, let us quickly run through an overview of a guide to the SBOC chapters. The first chapter describes the purpose and framework of the SBOC and provides an introduction of the key concepts of Scrum. It also contains the summary of Scrum principles, Scrum aspects, and Scrum processes. The second chapter expands on the 6 Scrum principles, the foundation on which the Scrum framework is based. Chapters 3 to 7 elaborate on the 5 Scrum aspects that must be addressed throughout any project. The chapters discussed are organization, business justification, quality, change, and risk. Chapters 8 to 12 cover the 19 Scrum processes involved in carrying out a Scrum project. These processes are, in turn, part of 5 Scrum phases, which are initiate, plan and estimate, implement, review and retrospect, and release. The phases detail the associated inputs and outputs of each process, as well as the various tools that may be used in each. Some inputs, tools, and outputs are mandatory and are indicated as such with asterisks. Others are optional, depending on the specific project, organizational requirements, and/or guidelines set forth by the organization's Scrum Guidance Body or SGB. Chapters 13 and 14 cover the 8 processes required to scale Scrum to large projects and the enterprise. For large-scale Scrum projects that require coordination across multiple teams, there are 3 additional Scrum processes, which are defined in Chapter 13, Scaling Scrum for Large Projects. There are also specific processes defined when implementing Scrum at the enterprise level, which are covered in Chapter 14, Scaling Scrum for the Enterprise. Finally, Appendix A contains an overview of the Agile Manifesto by Fowler and Highsmith, and a discussion of various Agile methods for those who want more information about Agile. The sections covered in this chapter are 1.1 Overview of Scrum, 1.2 Why Use Scrum, 1.3 Purpose of a Guide to the SBOC, 1.4 Framework of a Guide to the SBOC, and 1.5 Scrum versus Traditional Project Management. And that wraps up the introduction to the Scrum body of knowledge.
Hello, and welcome back to Scrum Study Course on a guide to the Scrum body of knowledge. In the earlier SBOC guide module, we saw that a guide to the Scrum body of knowledge provides guidelines for the successful implementation of Scrum. So isn't it necessary that we know a little more about Scrum? Let's take a look. A Scrum project involves a collaborative effort to create a new product, service, or other results as defined in the project vision statement. All projects are impacted by constraints of time, cost, scope, quality, resources, organizational capabilities, and other limitations that make them difficult to plan, execute, manage, and ultimately succeed. However, successful implementation of the results of a finished project provides significant business benefits to an organization. It is therefore important for organizations to select and practice an appropriate project management framework. And this is where Scrum comes in. So what is Scrum? Scrum is one of the most popular agile frameworks. It is an adaptive, iterative, fast, flexible, and effective methodology designed to deliver significant value quickly and throughout a project. Scrum ensures transparency in communication and creates an environment of collective accountability and continuous progress. The Scrum framework, as defined in the SBOM guide, is structured in such a way that it supports product and service development in all types of industries and in any type of project, irrespective of its complexity. Here another question arises. Why is Scrum better than other project management techniques? A key strength of Scrum lies in its use of cross-functional, self-organized, and empowered teams who divide their work into short, concentrated work cycles called sprints. Think of sprints as short time spans in which a certain amount of work must be done. Take a look at this diagram, which illustrates the Scrum project's flow. As you can see, the Scrum cycle begins with a stakeholder meeting, during which the project vision is created. The product owner then develops a prioritized product backlog, which contains a prioritized list of business and project requirements, written in the form of user stories. Each sprint begins with a sprint planning meeting, during which high-priority user stories are considered for inclusion in the sprint. A sprint generally lasts between 1 and 6 weeks and involves the Scrum team working to create potentially shippable deliverables or product increments. During the sprint, short, highly focused daily stand-up meetings are conducted where team members discuss daily progress. Toward the end of the sprint, a sprint review meeting is held, during which the product owner and relevant stakeholders are provided a demonstration of the deliverables. The product owner accepts the deliverables only if they meet the predefined acceptance criteria. The sprint cycle ends with a retrospect sprint meeting where the team discusses ways to improve processes and performance as they move forward into the subsequent sprint. I hope you enjoyed this quick overview and learning about the project's flow in Scrum, and I'll see you in the next module, where we will briefly discuss the history of Scrum. And thank you for learning with us. Hello everyone, and welcome to Scrum Study. In the previous module, I took you through the overview of Scrum. Before moving into the core concepts of Scrum in detail, let's first have a look at the history of Scrum. The framework had its inception in the 1980s. In the mid-80s, Hirotaka Takuchi and Ikuhiro Nonaka defined a flexible and all-inclusive product development strategy, where the development team works as a unit to reach a common goal. They described an innovative approach to product development that they called a holistic or rugby approach, where a team tries to go the distance as a unit, passing the ball back and forth. They based their approach on manufacturing case studies from various industries. Takuchi and Nonaka proposed that product development should not be like a sequential relay race, but rather should be analogous to the game of rugby, where the team works together, passing the ball back and forth as they move as a unit down the field. The rugby concept of Scrum, where a group of players form together to restart the game, was introduced in this article to describe the author's proposal that product development should involve moving the Scrum downfield. Later, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland elaborated on the Scrum concept and its applicability to software development in a presentation at the Object-Oriented Programming, Systems, Languages, and Applications OOPSLA conference held in 1995 in Austin, Texas. Since then, several Scrum practitioners, experts, and authors have continued to refine the Scrum conceptualization and framework. In recent years, Scrum has increased in popularity and is now the preferred project development framework for many organizations globally. Thank you for learning with us. Hello, and welcome back to Scrum Study Course on a guide to the Scrum body of knowledge. In this module, you will learn how Scrum is helpful to any project. So let us see some of the key benefits of using Scrum. Adaptability is the very first benefit I want to point out here. The Scrum principles of empirical process control and iterative delivery make projects adaptable and open to incorporating change when it occurs. Scrum processes are designed to embrace change. A key benefit for stakeholders is that Scrum is customer-centric. emphasis on business value and having a collaborative approach that includes stakeholders, ensures a customer-oriented framework in a Scrum-controlled project. Continuous delivery of value is an additional benefit that results from being customer-centric. In Scrum, iterative processes enable the continuous delivery of value through the ship deliverables process. Each sprint produces a potentially shippable product, service, or desired result. Early delivery of high value is a closely related business benefit of using Scrum. Not only is the delivery of value continuous, the create prioritized product backlog process ensures that the highest value requirements of the customer are met first. Both the customer and the project team benefit from continuous feedback. In Scrum, continuous feedback is provided through the conduct daily stand-up and demonstrate and validate sprint processes. Continuous feedback contributes to another key benefit, transparency. In a Scrum-managed project, all information centers, such as the Scrum board and sprint burnout chart, are continually displayed and updated, which leads to an open working environment. Sprint review meetings demonstrate potentially shippable products to stakeholders, keeping them fully informed about the current status and progress of the project. Transparency enhances the important benefit of a high-trust environment. The conduct daily stand-up and retrospect sprint processes promote transparency and collaboration. This leads to a high-trust work environment, ensuring low friction between employees. Scrum's adaptability and transparency create an environment of continuous improvement. As the project progresses, the deliverables are improved progressively, sprint by sprint, with changes and improvements being included and managed through the Scrum prioritized product backlog process. Another important benefit is sustainable pace. Scrum processes are designed such that the people involved can work at a pace that they can sustain indefinitely. Another benefit of using Scrum is an efficient development process. In Scrum, it has been observed that time boxing and minimizing non-essential work leads to higher efficiency levels. The next benefit is motivation. The conduct daily stand-up and retrospect sprint processes lead to greater levels of motivation among employees. Faster problem resolution is one of the important benefits of using Scrum in projects. Collaboration and co-location of cross-functional teams lead to identifying and solving problems more quickly. The next benefit is effective deliverables. The demonstrate and validate process and regular reviews after creating deliverables ensures effective deliverables to the customer. The next benefit is collective ownership. The estimate user stories process and commit user stories process allows team members to take ownership of the project and of their work, leading to better quality in Scrum. High velocity is another important benefit. A collaborative framework enables highly skilled cross-functional teams to achieve their full potential and high velocity. Scrum pioneer and signer of the Agile Manifesto, Jeff Sutherland, calls this state hyper-productivity. And the last benefit that we will discuss is Scrum's innovative environment. The retrospect sprint and retrospect project processes create an environment of introspection, learning, and adaptability, leading to an innovative and creative work environment. And that wraps up this module introducing key benefits of using Scrum in any project. I look forward to seeing you again, and thank you for learning with us. Hello, and welcome to our Scrum study course on the Scrum body of knowledge. In the previous module, we discussed the benefits of using Scrum, and now we will discuss the scalability of Scrum as a framework. So, how fast and scalable is Scrum when it comes to project size? To be effective, Scrum teams should ideally have 6 to 10 members. This practice may be the reason for the misconception that the Scrum framework can only be used for small projects. That is not so. Scrum can easily be scaled for effective use in large projects. In situations where the Scrum team size exceeds 10 members, multiple Scrum teams can be formed to work on the project. Between 2007 and 2009, Yahoo had 200 Scrum teams worldwide, many working on the same projects. This definitely raises the question as to who facilitates the coordination among multiple Scrum teams, and the answer is the convened Scrum of Scrums process. It not only facilitates coordination among the Scrum teams, but also enables effective implementation in larger projects. Additionally, large or complex projects are often implemented as part of a program or portfolio. The Scrum framework can be applied to manage even programs and portfolios. The logical approach of the guidelines and principles in this framework can be used to manage projects of any size, spanning geographies and organizations. Such large projects may have multiple Scrum teams working in parallel, making it necessary to synchronize and facilitate the flow of information and communication. This is accomplished in the Scrum of Scrums. We have heard the term Scrum of Scrums several times now. What is it? The convened Scrum of Scrums is the process ensuring this synchronization needed on large projects. The various Scrum teams are represented in this meeting, and the objectives are to provide updates about progress, discuss challenges faced during the project, and coordinate activities. There are no set rules regarding the frequency of these meetings. The factors determining the frequency are the amount of inter-team dependency, size of the project, Scrum guidance body recommendations, and the level of complexity. With this, we come to the end of this module. Thank you for learning with us.
Hello, and welcome to Scrum Study. In this module, we will learn the purpose of the SBOC Guide. We will start by asking two questions. Why do we need the SBOC Guide, first of all? And what is it based on? Well, in recent years, it has become evident that more and more organizations are choosing Scrum over traditional project management models. This suggests that Scrum principles and practices are having a greater impact than traditional project management models on project success. SBOC Guide was developed as a means to create a necessary guide for organizations and project management practitioners who want to implement Scrum, as well as those already doing so who want to make needed improvements to their processes. It is based on experience drawn from numerous projects across a variety of organizations and industries. The contributions of many Scrum experts and project management practitioners have been considered in the development of SBOC Guide. So let's now see who uses SBOC Guide and how it is valued. The SBOC Guide is especially valuable to the Scrum Core team members. Who are the Scrum Core team members? Let's meet them one by one. Here comes the product owners first. They use the SBOC Guide to fully understand the Scrum framework and particularly the customer stakeholder-related concerns involving business justification, quality, change, and risk aspects associated with Scrum projects. Scrum Masters are the next group of people who use SBOC Guide to learn their specific role in overseeing the application of Scrum framework to Scrum projects. And lastly, the Scrum team members, who use the SBOC Guide to better understand Scrum processes and the associated tools that may be used to create the project's product or service. The SBOC Guide is valued in other aspects as well. It is used as a comprehensive guide for all Scrum practitioners working on Scrum projects in any organization or industry. It is a reference source for anyone interacting with the Scrum Core team, including but not limited to the Portfolio Product Owner, Portfolio Scrum Master, Program Product Owner, Program Scrum Master, Scrum Guidance Body, and stakeholders such as the sponsor, customer, and users. And it is a knowledge source for any persons who have no prior experience or knowledge of the Scrum framework but want to learn the details about the subject. Now that we have learned about the SBOC Guide in detail, let us go through the various levels of certification exams offered by Scrum Study which aspirants can take up based on their understanding of the content of the SBOC Guide. The certification exams are as follows. For all Scrum team members, participants, and stakeholders, SBOC Guide recommends a Scrum Developer Certification, or SDC, as an entry-level certification. For all Scrum Masters, Scrum Master Certification, or SMC, is proposed. This certification provides professionals with a practical, working knowledge of Scrum. Scrum Steady Agile Master Certified, or SAMC, provides the participants with the ability to compare and choose which methodology would be appropriate in a given situation. The Scrum Product Owner Certification, or SPOC, is designed to provide professionals with a practical, working knowledge of Scrum that equips them to handle the business aspects and stakeholders in a Scrum framework. If you are an active SMC, SPOC, or SDC who has reached that next level of experience and expertise in using Scrum framework, elevate your career even further by earning the ESMC credentials. Professionals looking to take up the Chief Product Owner, Portfolio Product Owner, or Program Product Owner roles and scale Scrum to large projects, programs, or the enterprise can opt for Scaled Scrum Product Owner Certified, or SSPOC certification. And professionals planning to take up the roles of Chief Scrum Master, Portfolio Scrum Master, or Program Scrum Master and handle multiple Scrum teams in a large project or program or at the enterprise level can opt for the Scaled Scrum Master Certified, or SSMC certification. Please note that to be eligible to attain SSPOC certification, you should possess SPOC certification, and to attain SSMC certification, you should have SMC certification. So this covers the purpose, use, and various levels of certification exams in Scrum. Thank you for learning with us. Hello, and welcome to Scrum Study. We will now look at the module on the framework of the SBOC Guide. The SBOC Guide is broadly divided into three key areas. They are principles, aspects, and processes. So let us start with the principles. A total of 6 principles given in the SBOC Guide form the foundation of Scrum. They are empirical process control, self-organization, collaboration, value-based prioritization, time boxing, and iterative development. These principles are the chief guidelines for implementing Scrum. There are 5 Scrum aspects. They are organization, business justification, quality, change, and risk. These aspects are important considerations to be included in all Scrum projects. And finally, we have the processes. There are a total of 19 fundamental processes and 8 additional processes required for scaling Scrum to large projects and the enterprise described in the SBOC Guide. The 19 fundamental processes are distributed throughout the 5 phases: initiate, plan and estimate, implement, review and retrospect, and release. Within the phases, you will find a detailed description of each process, its inputs, tools, and outputs. 3 additional processes required for scaling Scrum to large projects are defined in Chapter 13, and 5 additional processes required for scaling Scrum to the enterprise are addressed in Chapter 14. Hello, and welcome back to Scrum Study course on the Guide to the Scrum Body of Knowledge, or the SBOC Guide. In this section, we will look at the best way to use the SBOC Guide. But before that, let's review some foundation material. The SBOC Guide is a reference and knowledge guide. It is used by experienced Scrum practitioners and other product and service developers, as well as persons with no prior experience or knowledge of Scrum or other project management frameworks. In SBOC Guide, you will find that the contents are organized for easy reference by the 3 Scrum core team roles, that of the Product Owner, Scrum Master, and the Scrum Team. The content for each Scrum core team role is identified in the Role Guide section. A Roles Guide provides direction regarding the relevance of each section in the chapter to the Scrum core team member. The chapters covering the 6 Scrum principles and 5 Scrum aspects also includes a role guide. What's more, in order to facilitate the best application of the Scrum framework, the SBOC guide has clearly differentiated mandatory inputs, tools, and outputs from non-mandatory or optional ones. In the SBOC guide, the inputs, tools, and outputs denoted by asterisks are mandatory, while others with no asterisks are optional. It is recommended that persons being introduced to Scrum focus primarily on the mandatory inputs, tools, and outputs, while more experienced practitioners should read the entire fundamental process phases. And professionals looking to scale Scrum to large projects and to the enterprise should focus on the additional processes described in chapters 13 and 14. Thank you for learning with us.
Hello, and welcome to our module on Scrum principles in the SBOC guide. So far, in our journey towards Scrum, we have learned how to use the Scrum body of knowledge. In many of the previous videos, we have only mentioned the Scrum principles. Now, in this module, we will look at these principles more closely. So why are these principles so important? Because the Scrum principles are the core guidelines for applying the Scrum framework and should always be used in all Scrum projects. So let's take a look at these principles. The 6 Scrum principles are empirical process control, self-organization, collaboration, value-based prioritization, time boxing, and iterative development. You can see how they are arranged in this diagram. Note that Scrum principles can be applied to any type of project in any organization and should always be followed in order to ensure effective implementation of the Scrum framework. Scrum principles are non-negotiable and should be applied as specified in the SBOC guide. Keeping the principles intact and using them appropriately instills confidence in the Scrum framework with regard to attaining the objectives of the project. On the other hand, the Scrum aspects and processes can be modified to meet the requirements of the project or the organization. Following is a detailed look at each principle, beginning with empirical process control. This principle emphasizes the core philosophy of Scrum, based on the 3 main ideas of transparency, inspection, and adaptation. The second principle is self-organization. It focuses on today's workers, who deliver significantly greater value when encouraged to self-organize, rather than working under command and control style of traditional project management. The third principle, collaboration, focuses on the 3 core dimensions related to collaborative work. That is, awareness, articulation, and appropriation. It also advocates project management as a shared value creation process, with teams working and interacting together to deliver the greatest value. The fourth principle is value-based prioritization. This principle highlights the focus of Scrum to deliver maximum business value, beginning early in the project and continuing throughout. The fifth principle is time boxing. This principle emphasizes time as a limiting constraint in Scrum. Time boxing is used to help effectively manage project planning and execution. Time-boxed elements in Scrum include sprints, daily stand-up meetings, sprint planning meetings, and sprint review meetings. And finally, we have iterative development as the 6th principle. This principle defines iterative development and emphasizes how to better manage changes and build projects that satisfy customer needs. It also delineates the product owners' and organization's responsibilities related to iterative development. That covers the 6 Scrum principles. These will continue to be developed throughout our other course modules. Thank you for learning with us. Hello, and welcome to the new module Scrum Aspects under the framework of SBOC Guide. Previously, we saw the key principles of Scrum in detail. This module will introduce you to the various aspects of Scrum, which must all be addressed and managed through a Scrum project. The 5 Scrum aspects that we will discuss in this module are organization, business justification, quality, change, and risk. In the SBOC Guide, All 5 Scrum aspects are presented in chapters 3 through 7. We will be discussing all of them one by one, but let's first start with the very first aspect, organization. For now, let's keep the key concepts under the organization aside and try to understand the defined roles and responsibilities in a Scrum project. Why? Because defined roles and responsibilities ensures the successful implementation of Scrum. Evidently, Scrum roles fall into 2 broad categories, core roles and non-core roles. Core roles are those that are involved in producing the project's product or service. Individuals who are assigned core roles are fully committed to the project. They are ultimately responsible for the success of each project iteration and of the project as a whole. Core roles are assigned to the product owner, Scrum Master, and the Scrum team. Now that we have seen that there are a few inevitable names associated with the core roles, let's meet them one by one and see what they do in a Scrum-controlled project. First, we have the product owner, who is the person responsible for achieving maximum business value for the project. He or she is also responsible for articulating customer requirements and maintaining business justification for the project. The product owner represents the voice of the customer. Next is the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is a facilitator who ensures that the Scrum team is provided with an environment conducive to completing the project successfully. The Scrum Master guides, facilitates, and teaches Scrum practices to everyone involved in the project. The Scrum Master clears impediments for the team and ensures that all the Scrum processes are being followed. To clarify, here's an example. This is ABC Corporation. The software development team at ABC is facing roadblocks lately. Why? Well, it seems that they are unable to live up to the set standards of a project in terms of quality. What is the stumbling block here? Lack of expertise required for the project. It, in turn, leads to delay. So this is where the Scrum Master is going to pitch in. How is he or she going to do that? First of all, the task of the Scrum Master will be to focus on finding ways to clear the impediment, which comes in the form of lack of expertise required for the project. How is this possible? Well, the Scrum Master at this juncture is either going to raise an immediate requirement for hiring software developers with required expertise, or he can make an arrangement for training the existing staff. The Scrum Master will now make a decision based on the cost-effectiveness and time consumption of the action to be taken. Finally, it's now the turn of the Scrum team. They actually do the work. The Scrum team is the group or team of people who are responsible for understanding the requirements specified by the product owner and creating the deliverables of the project. So, considering the earlier example, the software development team, either with newly recruited experts or with newly acquired training, will proceed in accordance with the requirements set by the product owner. Now, let's take a closer look at the non-core roles. The non-core roles are optional and may include all team members who are interested in the project. They have no formal role in the project team, but they may interface with the team. However, they may not be responsible for the success of the project. The non-core roles should be taken into account in any Scrum project. So, who is involved in non-core roles? Stakeholders, the Scrum guidance body, vendors, the chief product owner, and the chief Scrum Master. Let's meet these people one by one. The first role is the stakeholder or stakeholders. This is a collective term that includes customers, users, and sponsors. They frequently communicate with the Scrum core team and influence the project throughout the project's development. Most importantly, it is for the stakeholders that the project produces the collaborative benefits. Second is the Scrum guidance body, which is also referred to as the SGB. It is an optional role consisting of a set of documents or a group of experts, typically involved in defining objectives related to quality, government regulations, security, and other key organizational parameters. This Scrum guidance body guides the work carried out by product owner, Scrum Master, and Scrum team. The next non-core role is played by the vendors. They include external individuals or internal organizations that provide products or services that are not within the core competencies of the project organization. The Chief Product Owner is another non-core role. This role is relevant for large projects that have multiple Scrum teams. The Chief Product Owner is responsible for coordinating the work of multiple product owners. The last non-core role is the Chief Scrum Master, who is responsible for coordinating Scrum-related activities in large projects that may require multiple Scrum teams to work in parallel. Now, to help you understand how the Scrum organizational structure works, we have a diagram here. The roles played by the Scrum Master, Product Owner, Scrum Team, and the interrelation of these roles, and the way in which each one of them contributes to fulfilling customer requirements, are summarized here. The organization aspect of Scrum also addresses the team structure requirements to implement Scrum in programs and portfolios. So now that we have seen the core and non-core roles played in a Scrum-controlled project, let's now discuss another key Scrum aspect, business justification. It's important for an organization to perform a proper business assessment prior to starting any project. This helps the key decision makers understand the business need for change or for a new product or service, the justification for moving forward with a project, and its viability. Business justification in Scrum is based on the concept of value-driven delivery. One of the key characteristics of any project is the uncertainty of results or outcomes. It is impossible to guarantee project success at completion, regardless of the size or complexity of a project. Considering this uncertainty of achieving success, Scrum attempts to start delivering results as early in the project as possible. This early delivery of results, and thereby value, provides an opportunity for reinvestment and proves the worth of the project to interested stakeholders. Furthermore, Scrum's adaptability allows the project's objectives and processes to change if its business justification changes. It is important to note that although the product owner is primarily responsible for business justification, other team members also contribute significantly. So far, we have seen two important Scrum aspects. Quality is the third aspect we are going to discuss now. In Scrum, quality is defined as the ability of the completed product or deliverables to meet the acceptance criteria and achieve the business value expected by the customer. To ensure that a project meets its quality requirements, Scrum adopts an approach of continuous improvement, whereby the team learns from experience and stakeholder engagement to constantly keep the prioritized product backlog updated with any changes in requirements. The prioritized product backlog is simply never complete until the closure or termination of the project. Moreover, any changes to the requirements reflect changes in the internal and external business environment and allow the team to continually work and adapt to achieve those requirements. Through repetitive testing, Scrum requires work to be completed incrementally through sprints, rather than waiting until the end to produce deliverables. This means that errors get fixed right away, instead of being postponed until the end of the project. Moreover, important quality-related tasks, for example, development, testing, and documentation, are completed as part of the same sprint by the same team. This ensures that quality is inherent in any deliverable created as part of a sprint. Such deliverables from Scrum projects, which are potentially shippable, are also referred to as done. For example, if internal customers are not happy with a product delivered in terms of quality, the issues can be listed in the prioritized product backlog. These kinds of issues will be addressed during the sprints, and the team will try to fix them so that quality is not compromised. Thus, continuous improvement with repetitive testing optimizes the probability of achieving the expected quality levels in a Scrum project. Constant discussions between the Scrum core team and stakeholders, including customers and users, with actual increments of the product being delivered at the end of every sprint, ensures that the gap between customer expectations from the project and actual deliverables produced is constantly reduced. The Scrum guidance body may also provide guidelines about quality, which may be relevant to all Scrum projects in the organization. The next aspect that we're going to discuss here is change, another very important aspect of Scrum. Every project, regardless of its method or framework used, is exposed to change. It is imperative that project team members understand that the Scrum development processes are designed to embrace change. Organizations should try to maximize the benefits that arise from change and minimize any negative impacts through diligent change management processes in accordance with the principles of Scrum. A primary principle of Scrum is its acknowledgement, which are as follows. First, stakeholders, for example, customers, users, and sponsors, change their minds about what they want and need throughout a project, which is sometimes referred to as requirements churn. Second, it is very difficult, if not impossible, for stakeholders to define all requirements during project initiation. Scrum projects welcome change by using short, iterative sprints that incorporate customer feedback on each sprint's deliverables. This enables the customer to regularly interact with the Scrum team members, view deliverables as they're ready, and change requirements, if needed, earlier in the sprint. Also, the portfolio or program management teams can respond to change requests pertaining to Scrum projects applicable at their level. Let's now look at the last Scrum aspect, which is risk. What is risk, and how do you define it? Risk is defined as an uncertain event or set of events that can affect the objectives of a project and may contribute to its success or failure. Risks that are likely to have a positive impact on the project are referred to as opportunities, whereas threats are risks that could affect the project in a negative manner. For example, consider a situation in which one of the key investors in a project backs off at a prime moment. This is a risk affecting the project in a negative way. However, if the project finds a better investor willing to invest in a bigger and better way, it can be considered as an opportunity. Managing risk must be done proactively. It is an iterative process that should begin at project initiation and continue throughout the project's life cycle. The process of managing risks should follow some standardized steps to ensure that risks are identified and evaluated, and that a proper course of action is determined and acted upon accordingly. Risks should be identified, assessed, and responded to on the basis of two factors. These are the probability of each risk's occurrence and the possible impact in the event of such an occurrence. Risks with a high probability and impact value are determined by multiplying both factors, and they should be addressed before those with a relatively lower value. In general, once a risk is identified, it is important to understand the risk with regard to the probable causes and the potential effects if the risk occurs. And with that, we conclude our module on Scrum aspects. I hope this segment was insightful and suggestive of the main aspects of the Scrum framework. I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you for learning with us. Hi there, and welcome back to the introduction of Scrum. In our learning so far of the framework of the SBOT Guide, we have already learned about how to use the SBOT Guide, Scrum principles, and Scrum aspects in the previous modules. Now let's take a closer look at the processes and how they work. You probably remember hearing that a project has a product backlog of prioritized requirements, as well as a product owner who is responsible for prioritizing these requirements. Now the question is, how do you get this work done? First of all, let's define the Scrum processes in general. Scrum processes address the specific activities and flow of a Scrum project. In total, there are 19 processes, which are grouped into 5 phases. These phases are presented in chapters 8 through 12 of the SBOT Guide. These 5 phases describe each process in detail, including the associated inputs, tools, and outputs. Also, in each process, some inputs, tools, and outputs are designated as mandatory, while others are designated as optional. The decision to include any optional input, tool, and/or output depends on the particular project, organization, or industry. Inputs and outputs denoted as mandatory are important for the successful implementation of Scrum in any organization. Next, we'll take a closer look at the phases and the processes enlisted under them. Initiate is the first phase, and the processes carried out as part of Initiate are as follows. Create project vision is the first process performed. In this process, the project business case is reviewed to create a project vision statement that will serve as the inspiration and provide focus for the entire project. The product owner is identified in this process. Identify Scrum Master and stakeholders is the second process, during which the Scrum Master is identified using specific selection criteria. Form Scrum Team is the third process in the initiate phase. In this process, Scrum team members are identified. Normally, the product owner has the primary responsibility of selecting team members, but he or she often chooses the team in collaboration with the Scrum Master. The fourth process is develop epics. In this process, the project vision statement serves as the basis for developing epics, which are large, unrefined user stories. User group meetings may be held to develop epics. Create a prioritized product backlog is the next process. In this process, epics and unrefined user stories are refined and elaborated, then prioritized to create a prioritized product backlog for the project. The done criteria is also established at this point. The last process classified under the initiate phase is conduct release planning. In this process, the Scrum core team reviews the user stories in the prioritized product backlog to develop a release planning schedule, which is essentially a phased deployment schedule that can be shared with the project stakeholders. The second phase we're going to learn is plan and estimate, and these are processes grouped under this phase. First is create user stories. We can see that in this process, user stories and their related user story acceptance criteria are created. User stories are usually written by the product owner and are designed to ensure that the customer's requirements are clearly depicted and can be fully understood by all the stakeholders. User story writing exercises may be held. This involves Scrum team members creating the user stories. User stories are incorporated into the prioritized product backlog. Approve, estimate, and commit user stories is the next process. In this process, the product owner approves user stories for a sprint. Then, the Scrum Master and Scrum team estimate the effort required to develop the functionality described in each user story. And the Scrum team commits to develop the customer requirements in the form of approved, estimated, and committed user stories. The third process in the plan and estimate phase is create tasks. In this process, the approved, estimated, and user stories are broken down into specific tasks and compiled into a task list. Often, a task planning meeting is held for this purpose. Estimate tasks is the fourth process. During this process, the Scrum core team, in a task estimation workshop, estimates the effort required to accomplish each item in the task list. The result of this process is an effort estimated task list. The last process conducted during this phase is create sprint backlog. In this process, the Scrum core team holds sprint planning meetings where the group creates a sprint backlog containing all tasks to be completed in the sprint. The third phase we'll discuss in this module is implement. Let's now look at the various processes listed to be carried out during this phase. The first process in the implement phase is create deliverables. In this process, the Scrum team works on the tasks in the sprint backlog to create sprint deliverables. A Scrum board is often used to track the work and activities being carried out. Issues or problems being faced by the Scrum team could be updated in an impediment log. The second process performed is conduct daily stand-up. Every day, a highly focused, time-boxed meeting is conducted, which is called the daily stand-up meeting. This is the forum for the Scrum team to update each other on their progress and any impediments they may be facing. The last process conducted during the implement phase is groom prioritized product backlog. In this process, the prioritized product backlog is continuously updated and maintained. A prioritized product backlog review meeting may be held, in which any changes or updates to the backlog are discussed and incorporated into the prioritized product backlog as appropriate. The next phase is review and retrospect. There are three main processes that take place during this phase. The first one is convene Scrum of Scrums. In this process, Scrum team representatives convene for Scrum of Scrums meetings in predetermined intervals, or whenever required, to collaborate and track their respective progress, impediments, and dependencies across teams. This is relevant only for large projects where multiple Scrum teams are involved. The second process is demonstrate and validate sprint. In this process, the Scrum team demonstrates the sprint deliverables to the product owner and to the relevant stakeholders in a sprint review meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to secure approval and acceptance of the product or service by the product owner. The last process performed in the review and retrospect phase is retrospect sprint. In this process, the Scrum Master and Scrum team meet to discuss the lessons learned throughout the sprint. This information is documented as lessons learned, which can be applied to future sprints. Often, as a result of this discussion, there may be agreed actionable improvements or updated Scrum guidance body recommendations. The last phase is release. There are two main processes performed during this phase. The first one is ship deliverables. In this process, accepted deliverables are delivered or transmitted to the relevant stakeholders. A formal working deliverables agreement documents the successful completion of the sprint. The second process is retrospect project. In this process, which completes the project, organizational stakeholders and Scrum Core team members assemble to retrospect the project and identify, document, and internalize the lessons learned. Often, these lessons lead to documentation of agreed actionable improvements to be implemented in future projects. This brings us to the end of the segment on the Scrum processes. Before we wind up, let's recap the various phases and processes we learned. Here is the summary of all Scrum processes. I hope you have enjoyed learning with us today. We look forward to seeing you in our next segment, Scrum versus Traditional Project Management. Thank you for learning with us. Hello, and welcome to Module 20 of our Scrum study course on the Scrum body of knowledge. So far, we have discussed the benefits, purpose, scalability, principles, processes, phases, and aspects. Actually, everything one needs to know to implement Scrum. Have you ever wondered why Scrum is becoming more popular with every passing day? The simplest answer is that Scrum is better than traditional project management methods in many ways. Let's take a look at the differences between Scrum and a typical traditional project management model in a detailed way. The main difference between traditional project management models and the Scrum framework is the way in which the project is handled. Traditional project management is based on processes, while Scrum asks for a change in mindset with its focus on the people involved in the project. Although processes and tools are necessary in completing a project successfully, it is always the people who undertake, participate in, and implement the project. They do the work that takes the project from idea to reality. According to Scrum, the key factors in any project are the people, and the emphasis should be on them and their actions. Various cross-functional teams work in parallel across sprints to deliver potentially shippable deliverables at the end of each sprint. In a traditional model, the amount of functionalities not done remains high, and no product is delivered until the end or very near the end of the project. What gives Scrum an edge over other practices when it comes to the size of the team? Scrum can be used for managing projects of all sizes. Scrum works well for most projects and team sizes. Large projects utilize multiple Scrum teams, which work in sync to ensure project progress. Since its early days, Scrum is focused on producing working software over comprehensive documentation. It still does, and has expanded that focus to include the incremental development of products other than software. While documentation is necessary and useful for any project, Scrum teams focus on interim deliverables in which real value is delivered to the customer. The documentation is done minimally, as and when it is required. Lessons learned are recorded during retrospective meetings. The process followed in Scrum is iterative, unlike the linear model used in traditional frameworks, such as the waterfall model. The iterative model helps product development improve over time. It maximizes opportunities for feedback and ensures potentially shippable versions of working products at the end of each sprint or iteration. Scrum encourages iterative decision-making based on data, over the detailed upfront planning practiced in traditional waterfall-style project management. The focus is not on meeting the project's plan targets, but on satisfying customer requirements. Traditional project management can lead to a situation where the plan has succeeded, but the customer is not satisfied. In addition to iterative planning and delivery, Scrum supports the collaboration of all parties involved, the customer, business team, and project team, to minimize risk and achieve satisfaction. In Scrum, delivering the greatest value in the shortest amount of time means prioritizing work based on customer needs and dividing what will be done from what needs to be done. Scrum is often contrasted with other linear fashion project methods due to its low upfront planning and scheduling of activities, which move immediately into execution. In today's business environment, change is rapid and long-range planning is problematic. Predicting and planning every detail of new services and new product development is almost impossible. Scrum uses its low upfront planning framework to be adaptable and accommodating to change. Risk management is continuous in a Scrum-managed project, in which risk management works with the product owner, Scrum team, and Scrum Master to determine the best approach to handle identified risks. Whereas in traditional models, risks are handled up front, even before many risks have been identified. According to Scrum, each deliverable goes to the quality assurance team as it is developed, and testing is carried out, keeping customer value in mind. Strict controls, such as acceptance criteria and a clear definition of done, are in place to avoid deviations from the customer's requirements. In traditional methods, process is given more importance. As opposed to the traditional control and command style of management, Scrum believes that today's workers have much more to offer than just their technical expertise, and therefore deliver greater value when self-organized. Unlike traditional project management methods, in which value justification is done before the project commences, here in Scrum, it is done throughout the project. The management style followed in Scrum is decentralized in nature, such that the workforce does not have to be dependent on management for everything, which is the case in the old autocratic project management methods. This encourages workers to be innovative problem solvers. Scrum believes that product development is a shared value creation process that needs all the stakeholders working and interacting together to deliver the greatest value. Command and control is the rule of the day in traditional models. How is team performance measured in Scrum and traditional models? In Scrum, it is measured in terms of the business value the team creates, while plan conformity decides the measurement of performance in traditional project methods. In Scrum, the team develops business value at the end of every sprint. Does Scrum give a good return on investment? The answer is a big yes, and the ROI starts early and continues throughout the project life. Whereas in traditional project management methods, the project starts providing ROI for the customer at the end of the project. How does Scrum value a customer's participation? Well, Scrum highly recommends and is designed for the involvement of customers throughout the project. In traditional methods, customer involvement during product or service development is usually very limited, but can vary depending on a project's life cycle. All in all, Scrum is an innovative framework for managing any type of project. It is suited to our time and age, ready to replace the traditional project management techniques that were created in and for a bygone era. With this, we come to the end of our module on Scrum versus traditional project management. This is also the last module in our Scrum Study introductory course on the Scrum body of knowledge. We hope you have profited greatly from this course and look forward to seeing you in our other videos at scrumstudy.com. Thank you for learning with us.